Welcome to Accommodate This. As human beings, we have an innate need for social connection. And this is true for autistics as well, despite the stereotype that we are loners. The fact is, we need alone time to recharge, but that doesn't mean we don't want a social connection ever. And we may attempt to connect with people by talking about our special interests, because there's a specific harmony that occurs when we connect with people who share our expectations and interests. As they say, birds of a feather flock together. And this is a classic example of homophily, the tendency to form social connections with those who share similar characteristics. Now, homophily is the bedrock of human friendships, so this isn't specific to autistics. It's a human trait that applies to all of us. Even sociologists say that friendships are a special kind of social connection because they are based on kinship and shared experience rather than hierarchy or obligation. In fact, friendships also differ from other social connections because they are voluntary, informal, and seen as the freest of all human associations because they lack social constraints. But there's a catch. This freedom tends to fade away when neurotypicals and neurodivergent individuals try to connect. It's the classic double empathy problem where neurotypicals communicate quite well with other neurotypicals and neurodivergent individuals communicate quite well with other neurodivergent individuals. And this is because people within the same group tend to approach friendships in similar ways. So cooperation within each neurotype is often taken for granted. It's the bird of a feather phenomenon all over. But what happens when the flock of pigeons encounters a crow? What happens when a neurotypical person becomes friends with an autistic person who experiences the world differently? Suddenly that easy quality disappears. While both sides of a friendship are assumed to have equal responsibility for the relationship, studies show that mixed friendships often fail because neurotypical expectations don't shift. And part of this is because they are in the majority. So imagine if everyone you've ever met speaks the same social language. You assume that language is universal. When a neurotypical person encounters someone who processes the world differently, they do something called mind projection. They look at an autistic person's behavior and ask, what would motivate me to act like that? And because they are used to a flock that thinks like them, they use their own mind as a mirror. If a neurotypical person were to be blunt or quiet or skip a social ritual, they might conclude it is because they were intentionally being difficult. So when they see us doing those things, they project that same difficult motive onto us. Within that framework, it's easy to view the other person as intentionally rude rather than simply different. And that approach is fallacious because you could twist anyone's intentions using that same logic, but you may never be right because that person is not you. Again, anyone can fall into this trap. However, studies have shown that neurotypicals do this more often to neurodivergent individuals rather than the other way around. So to be fair, this is based on experts who have studied this phenomenon, observed it, and trended it with real statistics. This is not a judgment, it's a call for change. From the neurodivergent side, our flock is often very small, or maybe even non-existent, because we are in the minority. The impact of losing a connection is devastating. To survive, we learn to conform from an early age. We mask, we fawn, and we people please at the expense of our own mental health. And we often enter these friendships believing that if we sacrifice our comfort for the sake of the flock, we will receive social support in return. But the moment the mask slips due to burnout or sensory overload or what have you, it becomes clear we aren't truly part of the flock. The sad part is we are seen as imposters in those moments and are often bullied and ostracized because of it. And this creates a cycle of trauma where we end up losing ourselves in order to create connections that are never really based on a true kinship. It's almost inevitable that we will eventually be called weird, exhausting, or troublesome by the very people we thought were our friends. But if you think about it, those same people also feel a sense of betrayal because we were unwilling to be authentic in the first place. From the neurodivergent side, we are so risk adverse to friendships that we end up avoiding social connections altogether, denying ourselves of a basic human need. Now, another area of conflict is the black and white thinking that is stereotypically an autistic trait. If you ask me if I'm a black and white thinker, I'd tell you no. I actually don't think it's appropriate to reduce anyone to that level of simplicity. However, I can look back on my own life and identify times when people who I thought shared my values actually didn't. And I assumed that the information I had to share with them would be received with the same light in which it was intended. So I would approach a conversation very matter-of-factly, which can come across as black and white. Let me give you an example. I have a background in art, and I've been told I'm incredibly receptive to feedback. Well, in art school, we would pin our work to the wall for a group critique. And for many, that sounds like a nightmare, but for me, it was a powerful lesson. We would get incredibly specific too, like this line should be angled differently to correct the perspective, or the layout is off balance, so you need to add something over here. None of it was personal. We were all looking at the work objectively to make it better. Judgment wasn't a weapon, it was the point. And I carried this mindset into my career as an auditor, technical writer, and teacher. I was detailed, objective, and I welcomed feedback because I wanted the end result to be as good as possible. And I assumed everyone else operated this way. Unfortunately, most people see criticism as a personal attack. They lack the experience of objective critique, so their egos take the lead. And it's easy for me to forget that their experiences are different because we are so friendly most of the time. So it's easy to assume we share those formative experiences. Even people who have insisted that they are open to feedback have reacted as though they were attacked in the moment I offered a suggestion. And despite my decades of experience and how valid what I said was, it was seen as an attack. Now, sometimes feedback is an attack, but it's not always an attack. But to them, it felt like an attack because they are only used to feedback being an attack. They aren't used to it just being helpful advice. And without the experience or exposure to the positive side of feedback, their egos stepped in and they twisted my intentions to match their narrow understanding. And any attempt on my part to defend myself was just confirmation to them that they were right. But they were actually very much mistaken and biased. And it clouded their judgment. Ultimately, it didn't matter how good I was at my job. They convinced themselves that I was a sort of social terrorist. And they used that belief to justify bullying me, sabotaging my work, destroying my reputation, and ultimately ending my career, not to mention causing me severe mental and emotional harm. Now, I want to be clear. In cases like this, when someone regularly calls you difficult or vindictive when it isn't true, they aren't actually describing your character. They are describing their own confusion. They were looking at my crow behavior and trying to find a pigeon reason for it. Because they couldn't find a good pigeon reason, they invented a bad one. That wasn't a reflection of who I am. It was a reflection of the limits of their internal translation software. And this is the most dehumanizing part of the experience. Being demonized so the other person can feel justified in punishing you. But communication requires two people, and we often have no control over the other person's emotional state. And it can feel like a trap when we are expected to apologize for things we didn't do, while the other person avoids the vulnerability of admitting that they just misjudged us. But don't beat yourself up too much about these situations. I know it hurts and feels like a loss, but if a relationship is less important to someone than their pride, there's nothing you can do to repair it alone. And if they are unwilling to work with you honestly, but insist on seeing you as a villain, your repairs are only going to be undone by them. The DSM-5 says autistics have narrow interests. But because neurotypicals are in the majority, I propose that they often have narrow experiences. Does that seem harsh? Too reductive? Well, you don't say. I mean, the fact is, those kinds of blanket assessments aren't going to help anyone. It's more accurate to simply say that we are the outliers. We value fairness over conformity. We are exposed to more conflict, which often makes us better at compromising and letting go of our egos to keep a relationship alive. Neurotypicals are rarely challenged that way. They aren't forced to think differently because the majority thinks the same as they do. And because of these differences in life experience, and despite all of us being humans with needs for social connection, research suggests that autistics prefer seeking comfort, trust, and acceptance. So if you are neurodivergent and you've been told you're too much or not enough, I want you to hear this. You are not a failed neurotypical person. You are a successful neurodivergent person. Those horrible motives they accused you of, the rudeness, the arrogance, those aren't your traits. Those are the ghosts created when their expectations met your reality. You don't have to carry the weight of a version of you that only exists in their head. It's also important to remember that neurotypicals aren't necessarily trying to be cruel. They're operating on a factory setting that works for most people they meet. They aren't villains for having that setting, they are simply inexperienced and unchallenged. But you can acknowledge their misunderstanding without accepting their definition of you. If humanity wishes to bridge the chasm between neurotypicals and neurodivergent individuals, autism awareness and autism acceptance are critical. Awareness is just knowing we exist, and acceptance is looking past your own ego to see our perspective. When we, the neurodivergent, stop trying to fix our reflection in a warped mirror that wasn't built to reflect us, we can start trusting our own intentions again. And to the neurotypicals who have made it this far in the video, I'm asking for an accommodation. Please meet us halfway. I mean, is any of what I've shared in this video surprising or new to you? I can easily imagine someone saying this is simply human psychology, accept it. But if you recognize it as happening, don't you want to do anything about it? Or do you think this isn't just how things are, but how things should be? In which case, you do you, but understand you may be shunning a lot of people. And if you don't think that's how things have to be, if you think things could be better, then recognize that you can do something to make it better. Instead of accepting things as, that's just how the world works, consider the possibility that it doesn't have to be that way. Perhaps the unease you feel about those behaviors you witnessed was taught to you or developed under traumatic circumstances. Maybe you have nothing to be upset about. So take a step back, take a deep breath, and actually attempt to understand what happened instead of explaining it all with your limited personal experiences. Recognize that when you feel like a relationship is turning sour or someone has offended you in some way, you can start talking about it in a healthy, non-judgmental manner. Just be authentic about your own feelings And instead of assuming the motives of the other person or trying to imagine how they feel, simply ask them about their behavior. Otherwise, you risk imagining bad pigeon behaviors when in fact they're perfectly behaved crows. Now, I understand this sounds a lot like I'm projecting now. It sounds like I'm doing exactly what I'm accusing neurotypicals of doing. But that appearance is my point. Reaching that conclusion is precisely what I'm talking about, because the reality is the neurotypical community is refusing to simply meet us halfway. The autistic community is begging for neurotypicals to just meet us halfway. The thought that I'm being hypocritical now would not even cross your mind if you were actually meeting us halfway. At the end of the day, when you stop scapegoating the people who are different from you, you don't just help us, you expand your own world. So let's build a bigger flock together, one that has room for both the pigeons and the crows. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please comment, like, and subscribe to see more content like this, or click on the video here to continue watching.